of conflict than the last time. Uh, and I think that what the United States are trying to bet on this is that Iran is going to be tired before them and Israel and United States combined in this confrontation. This is something that is not at all proven. There's any evidence that Iran is not able to maintain this tension and this kind of mutual aggressions for much longer than they did the last time. So this is a very dangerous bet. I do believe that if the United States and Israel will start to lose this bet and will understand that a middle term conflict is starting to be a scenario where they are losing against Iran, that's where they are the most dangerous, because we know they have nuclear power. We know they have a leadership who has any moral limits, who have any respect for what we could call international law. So that's a very scary scenario that we could be facing right now.
Speak, the US has announced that attacks will continue throughout the weekend at least. Also, Iran has said that it is determined to keep fighting for its sovereignty, and also it has no fear regarding time, that the time that this confrontation could last. What would be, in your opinion, the consequences of a prolonged war for the Middle East as a whole?
I do believe that for the Middle East, definitely this is going to be this is going to unfold a lot of indirect tensions. We know that already right now there are a lot of bombing happening against US military bases in Middle East, which obviously call for a reaction for the countries that are being targeted by those attacks from Iran. We know that the United States have dozens and dozens of military bases all over the Middle East, which in fact are creating a tension between countries. Because when Iran is attacking, let's say, a military base in Bahrain or in the United Emirates, we know that those countries will directly be pushed towards a reaction against Iran. So we know that any attack against Iran will directly be exported to a tension between all the countries in the Middle East. We know that all over the Middle East there are internal tensions around forces who have been already the axis of resistance, with forces in Yemen, with forces in Lebanon, with forces in the Palestinian territories that have never stopped their resistance. So there is a first tension that's already there. There's new tensions being created by all the countries who are being dragged to this conflict because they have been hosting military bases for decades now. For the Middle East, all these conflicts will be plenty of destabilization, political, economic destabilization, but we need to be clear that this is not going to stop at the Middle East frontiers. All the economic consequences for the rest of the world in terms of, for example, the price of energy resources like oil and gas that are definitely going to be affected by these military confrontations. All the effects on the trade exchanges all over the world that are affected by, for example, what happens in the Red Sea or with the Yemeni forces disrupting the trade in front of their coasts as a way to retaliate against the attacks of the United States in the region. This is going to affect not only the Middle East, but all the world in terms of economical and social effects. That's why this perspective of a midterm confrontation is also very difficult to maintain by the United States and Israel.
Also, regarding economic consequences, how long can global markets sustain a total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, as it was informed earlier today by Iran and also Yemeni authorities? Regarding this primary oil corridor?
Well, I think that right now there's not a real possibility of understand that any corridor of safe, for example, safe paths for people, for trading, for natural resources can be considered as safe. Right now, there's not such a thing as safe corridors because we have seen how the United States act. Again, we can take the example of Gaza, where they promised, with the Israeli and the United States promised many times safe passages, safe corridors, that they were going to let some resources or people make their way through those corridors, and that never happened. We know that right now the only language that the United States and Israel can speak is the language of weapons, and these weapons have any limit, nor moral limit, nor limit in regard to international law, and nor limit in regard of territories that could be considered out of the range. That's not something that we can consider right now.
Also, regarding the alliance in the region, how will neighboring states and regional allies could respond to these consequences, to these implications, in order to revert the extension of this conflict?
Unfortunately, we have already seen how the different alliances work in the Middle East. We do have a resistance axis, which has been mainly led by Iran in the last years. We have some forces in Yemen, have some forces in Lebanon in the resistance, in the Palestinian resistance, which are in different places in the Middle East. But I do think that the allies of the United States and Israel will be the same that we have seen right now. And when I say allies, it's not allies in the same terms that we could say people who are going to attack Iran, but definitely people who are going to support militarily the United States, militarily the attacks from the Zionist entity of Israel. We know that those alliances are material alliances because there are military bases in the territories. There are military agreements between the United States and those territories. And right now, the only way to build a shift on those alliances is going to be a mobilization of the people in those countries. We know that many of the countries who are de facto allies of the imperialistic efforts of the United States and Israel, in fact, have internal uh, tensions between them and their own citizens. A lot of the citizens in Middle East have been supporting the Palestinian cause, have any goodwill in regard to the action of Israel and the United States in the region. We already saw that in the images today when in different countries Iran was bombing some of the United States military bases, and the people in those countries were claiming and were applauding the action of attacking those colonial and imperialistic infrastructure. So I do believe the alliances that we have already seen till today will not move. There's a resistant axis that is still strong, but has been very strongly hit in the last years and months. But there's a possibility of change if the people inside the countries who de facto ally with these imperialistic and Zionist efforts will push their governments to stop this kind of alliance. That's the only way that we could see a change, I do believe, in the alliances right now, because thinking of a change of alliances is not realistic for people who have already settled their alliances in other cases. And in this moment, we're only going to see governments who will strengthen those alliances. That's the perspective right now.
Now, coming back to the martyrdom of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, I wanted to ask you, what's the symbolic importance of this political and religious position within the region?
I do believe that there is really a narrative who is going to be developed in the whole region about the martyr of Khamenei. Um, this is going, and we know that in the all the narrative and the symbols of the anti-imperialistic resistance in the region, this kind of facts have been really strong. We already saw that in the Palestinian resistance. We already saw that in other places, like and in other moments, like some other killings that the United States developed against some other Iranian leaders. And right now, the symbol of people who led their life in this anti-imperialistic confrontation is going to be very strong, and it's definitely going to be one of the main pillars of the narrative against the imperialistic aggression of the United States in the next months and years. This is something which is going to be built as a symbol. We cannot forget that Khamenei has been the Iranian spiritual leader for decades now, and this is not just any leader. This is one of the main spiritual leaders in Iran and in all the axes of resistance, and is definitely going to be one of the biggest symbols of the anti-imperialistic resistance for the months, years, and decades to come.
Also, one last question, Eduardo. In his last statements to the press, the Ayatollah leader Ali Khamenei said, "A nation like ours, with our culture, our history, will never make a pact with those corrupt individuals that are leading the US." And I wanted to ask you after these remarks, what's the main legacy that Khamenei is leaving to Iranians?
I do believe that this kind of expressions of Khamenei are the expressions of something really deep, which is not only his legacy, but the legacy of a culture, as you were mentioning, in the country. What we can see in the world right now unfolding is a dying hegemonic power like the United States, who has lost, as I was saying, economic, productive, financial power in the last decades, but also, and maybe mainly in the last years, have lost totally all the cultural power and influence that it could have in the world in the past decades. We know that there's a huge void of cultural hegemonic power of the United States that has been built around all the deterioration of the image of the United States, not only because of things like the moral the crisis linked to the Epstein files or the ethical crisis which is being developed by the new technologies that the United States are producing, but mainly because it's the same thing as before. The only answer that the United States has to the erosion, the eroding, let's say, of its own power is weapons. And weapons could be powerful in terms of materialistic control, but in terms of cultural control, more and more the appealing of the US culture and the Western culture has been totally destroyed as an horizon for the people could even be in the opposition, the least against some of the governments which are leading uh, anti-imperialistic resistance. So what we're going to see right now is a legacy and maybe the building of a symbol which could really fill the void, the cultural void of the hegemonic power who is in totally an erosion day by day that is losing its power, as I was saying, mainly culturally. And in front of that void, that cultural void, the Western world, who has left to offer to the rest of the world, is a strong symbolism of uh, long-lasting cultures, of long-lasting history of people who have much more history than the Western world in terms of what they are proposing, and they are building a narrative and a symbol of sovereignty, a symbol of dignity, a symbol of self-protection, which is totally opposite to the void that the Western leaders are offering the world right now, which is only an horizon of poverty, of competition between people, or destruction of the nature of language of the only of the strongest who can humiliate the weakest, and this cannot be something that can be offered to the rest of the world. That's why this legacy and this symbol that is being building right now around the death of Khamenei is going to be so strong in terms of repealing the void of the Western world.
I think there is an important perspective that we need to assess in this analysis, and that would be how could this attack reshape the multipolar system in the world, how it is expected for the multipolar organizations to unite, to try to halt this ongoing confrontation, which is a very dangerous one for the entire planet.
Definitely, in other measures that the United States is taking, all these measures that are trying to maintain this hegemonic power have definitely the contradiction in each one of those efforts that is pushing the rest of the world to unite against a proposal of death, poverty, destruction that the Western, when I say Western, is definitely speaking not in a real term, but the Western is the United States and its European allies. What they are proposing to the rest of the world is obviously something that cannot be built as a stable hegemonic power, and in fact it is pushing more and more uh, quicker to a building of a multipolar power. In fact, each effort that the United States make in order to maintain their power through weapons, through military power, through imposing unilateral measures, sanctions, trying to starve entire countries with these economic and energetic sanctions, is only having the total opposite effect of what they are searching, which is reinforcing not only the economic power of the multipolar world, not only the financial power of the hegemonic world, but mainly the cultural legitimacy of this multipolar world, which is in opposition of the United States proposing to build a world where we could definitely have diplomacy, international rights, and other kind of interaction between nations in order to build a different path for humanity.
The US has been one of the epicenters of the demonstrations in support of the Iranian people in the face of this aggression. And also we've seen how key political figures such as Kamala Harris, for example, said that the US President Donald Trump has dragged the US into a war that the people do not want. And I wanted to ask you in this context, what evidence supports the claim that the Zionist regime significantly shapes U.S. Middle East policy?
Well, I do believe that right now the US policy, as I was mentioning, has no legitimacy at all. So all these calls for alternative building of forces against this lack of legitimacy, this cultural void, is going to be building exactly what we were mentioning before. Is going to be building all this legitimacy of another policy constitution worldwide, another regime, another horizon for the people. The problem with all these narratives and all these proposals and opposition to the policy of the United States right now is that all of this, for the moment, seem to be subjected to the correlation of forces in terms of weapons of real force. We know that we can have extremely powerful and strong moral narratives in the UN, in some of the most legitimate uh, um, governments in the world who have been working for their people for decades, who have been opposing the imperialistic forces. The unfortunately, the real truth around what is going on right now in terms of how there will be shifts in policy in the world is led right now by the ability and the capacity of the countries to defend themselves with weapons. That is the very sad but realistic lesson that we have learned in the Ukrainian territory, in the Palestinian territories, right now in the Iranian territories. And I think that even though all the speeches and the words that are so important from some of our leaders in the world are essential right now, which is really being able to open another path for international policy and other kind of policy is the language of the force and the capacity of defending ourselves with weapons against the military action of the imperial power of the United States. That is true in Middle East, in Asia in general, in Africa, but also in Latin America. And that's why we need to assess which is the capacity of our countries also in Latin America in order to be able to defend our sovereignty. Sadly, in Latin America, we have very few of this capacity, and the only horizon that we could have is the integration of our people. Only by the integration of the people of Latin America, we could build some force that can be able to protect our sovereignty, our territories by different means, which is not only the diplomacy, which right now is not working.
And in what ways this multidimensional crisis the US is facing with scandals, with internal turmoil, with military incursions, is showing the erosion of US hegemony?
Well, I think that that's exactly the case. If the United States are only using weapons, are only using brutal force, are only using the strategy of threatening by missiles the world, is because they do not have anything else to do. There's not cultural influence that can push the people of the different countries to dream about. This Western world that is being sold in the Hollywood movies. There is not any economic dream that the people all over the world could aspire to have when we see the crisis in terms of economy and social crisis that we see in the United States. Definitely, the military use of the United States as the only power left for them to protect the Germany is the best testimony and the best indication of how the United States has lost all the other levers that they had in the past to try to maintain their hegemony. But we need to be clear on one thing here: the fact that they are losing hegemony in all these other levels and only maintaining the military level as the only one left. That doesn't mean that the United States has already lost its hegemony, because the risk for humanity of a nuclear war is more than ever in front of us. We cannot, and I know that I have already said that in this interview, but it's really important to say that again and again. We cannot underestimate the risk and the threat that's for the whole humanity of having someone like Donald Trump or Netanyahu being the ones who are controlling some of the most dangerous nuclear arsenal in the world. So even if definitely this military action is a testimony and evidence of the loss of hegemony in many other aspects of the United States, at the same time is not at all the testimony or the fact that they have already lost all hegemony. In fact, it is the moment where we need to be more vigilant than ever of the risk and the threat that this is for the whole humanity. And I do believe that the US citizens are some of the ones that are going to be called as the ones who will play a key role into that challenge for humanity, because it's in the internal dispute, in the internal correlations of forces inside the United States, that a lot of things will be needed to be done. And so at the same time that we are speaking for the whole global south, for the whole other people in the world who are being threatened by the US Army, we need also to make a call for US citizens to understand that this threat is not only a threat for the Middle East, only a threat for Latin America, only a threat for other places in the world. It is a threat also for themselves and for the threat that this nuclear risk is posing for all of us in the whole humanity.
Also, it is evident that we are facing a crisis of international law. And in the face of that reality, for more vulnerable nations or perhaps smaller or sanctioned states, how would they balance diplomacy and deterrence in the face of this multidimensional crisis regarding international law?
Saying, I do believe that international law right now, we cannot be naive on the fact that we could think that international law has any meaning right now that could really influence the action of countries like the United States, of Israel. They do not care at all. There is not any institution in the world right now that have the power to make them change their military strategy. What international law is right now is needs to be is a cultural dispute, a cultural aspiration for all the countries in the world, where this new multipolar world can be a force of proposition of something different, of a real um, path to peace, to mutual understanding, to building of social development for all the peoples in the world. But right now, it is not being played only by words and only by legal legal levers in institutions that have already shown that they do not work. I think that the role of international law has totally shifted in the last decades. Maybe some decades ago, international law was still something that we could thought as a concrete, applicable lever in order to maintain peace. Now international law needs to play a role, which is a cultural role of an aspirational level that can only be fulfilled with the creation of multipolar world. So if we really understand that well, we cannot continue to treat international law in the same terms that we were treating that decades ago, which was a concrete and real lever. Right now, more an aspirational level that need to be proposed in this way and need to be shown as something that can be fulfilled only by the creation of a new multipolar world.
To peace, and I wanted to ask you, how can a long-standing solution be possible? And in the thinking of this utopical scenario, what could be the role of key powers such as China and Russia? I know we mentioned it slightly throughout an analysis, but I wanted if you could go a little deeper into what could be a shifting stance in the midst of these circumstances that the whole world is living through at this moment.
I do believe that we are, till right now, we have not seen any, let's say, red line that could be able to push for a reaction of of China or Russia to cross the level of diplomacy and go in a new escalation of the use of the force. Nonetheless, I do believe that there are some actions that are getting closer to that. We know that the use of some uh, some of the U.S. arsenal and Israel that could be similar to what happened in the Gaza Strip could be really a trigger for Russia or China in terms of how they could act in defense of something like that. Not only because it's a moral stance, but because it is a geopolitical strategic stance. We know that the Iranian territory is a territory that has a totally different proximity to Russia and China in geographical terms, and pose a direct threat to Russia and China. And we could, in a certain way, make a parallel with what happened with Ukraine. In Ukraine, we know that one of the reasons of the direct intervention of Putin and Russia in the Ukrainian territory was linked to the strategy of the NATO in order to put some missiles and some military infrastructure really near the border of Russia. So I think that that could be definitely one of the triggers, depending on how the military intervention of the United States and Israel unfold in Iranian territory. Right now, we are much more close to a strategy from the US and Israel of trying to make a shift of government in Iran. But if this looks more and more like an impossible outcome for them, maybe there's going to be a new level of strategy for the United States. We could be linked much more to a stronger change of regime, and that could definitely pose a direct threat to China, Russia. And in either case, whether it is a change of regime that allows the United States to have in the same than Ukraine, new military bases near some of the frontiers, much more near from Russia or China, or either it is a more stronger intervention which could lead to U.S. military presence in the territory. Both of these actions could definitely be a trigger for Russia and China to take direct action into this conflict.
And also going back to the idea, the statements that were given by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei when he said that a nation like ours, with our culture or history, that will never make a pact with those corrupt individuals. Precisely a few moments ago, US President Donald Trump said that now reaching an agreement with Iran is going to be much easier than yesterday. Do you agree with that assessment, taking into account all of the legacy, all of the history of struggle of the Iranian people in the face of the oppressors?
Well, I do believe that definitely it is not going to be something shorter or easier in terms of outcome and the the length of what is being this aggression right now, at least with what we have seen till now. If the United States and Israel have more cards to play and other strategies to unfold that could change that assessment, that's obviously a possibility, and they have a wide range of efforts that could lead to that. But what we have seen right now, there's definitely anything that could let us think that the length of this conflict is going to be shorter, is going to be different than the last time. I think that is totally the opposite. And right now, we are seeing a reaction of the people in Iran very similar to what we saw in the 12 days war, which is a call to unity, to a defense of sovereignty, despite the internal tensions that could be provoked by the different economic sanctions.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for your time hearing from the South, for your deep analysis and helping us and helping our audiences as well to go through these very moments of commotion for the Iranian people, for the Middle East, and also for the entire humanity. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure to be with you.
We were speaking at this moment to Eduardo Meneses, politologist, in the context of the ongoing and escalating conflict in the Middle East after the unprovoked attack that was performed by the US and Israel's coalition against the people of Iran that was kicked off in the very early hours of this morning of Saturday, February 28th, in an attack that also led to the killing, to the martyrdom of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, also in a moment of so greatest commotion for the entire Iranian people, for the entire region as well. People are pouring into the streets. They are praying for the soul of their highest leader as well. And now let's share some informations of this Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the hero, the martyr of the Iranian Revolution. He was killed, as we were informing, following joint attacks by the United States and Israel against the Persian nation. In this context, the recent military escalation targeted several high-ranking officials of the Islamic Republic, including the 86-year-old Supreme Leader. Khamenei represented the highest political and religious authority in the country, leading the Iranian state and the Islamic Revolution in accordance with the Iranian constitution. In the 1960s and 1970s, Khamenei actively participated in the opposition to the monarchy of the Reza Pahlavi, which led to his arrest and persecution by the Shah's intelligence service. After surviving an attack that left him partially paralyzed in his right arm, he was appointed president of Iran in 1985. He served 2 terms in the midst of the war between Iran and Iraq, consolidating his position in the political elite. Also, under his leadership, Tehran strengthened the axis of resistance coalition, gaining influence in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. His foreign policy was characterized by a strong opposition to Israel in the face of the genocide perpetrated in Palestine and continued support for the Palestinian cause in the Gaza Strip. And with this tragic information of the martyrdom of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, we are going to keep updating you in upcoming emissions on all that is related to this escalating conflict, with high concern that the whole humanity has its eyes upon the Middle East at this hour. Stay tuned with Telesur English for more information on this matter.